Hello everyone, this is week 2 of the new set and we're now in May, which is bringing us lots of lovely flowers in the garden. So before we get too overwhelmed, I thought we would start painting some of them now. So this week I'm demonstrating the loose and free technique and painting a Montana Clematis, which is a very beautiful flower, but can look quite complicated to paint as the blooms and leaves are all mingled together and tangled with the stalks. So I've cut a few pieces from the tangle and placed them in Oasis, and so my intention is then to create a composition from that, which I hope is not too complicated, but will at the same time indicate the character of the plant and the way it sits and the way it grows, etc. So these are the colours that I've chosen, and to a very large extent I'm hoping to allow the composition to dictate itself a bit. But I do just want to show you first, just to remind you, because I'm hoping that maybe I'll let some of the subjects flow into a background here and there, maybe. Can you see these flowers? I hope you can. So when you've actually popped down an area of paint, while it's still wet, you can actually allow some of that to bleed into the background space. Or you can put another colour with it and allow some of that colour to bleed into the subject. If you want to blur some of it, you can allow those colours to mingle. But the main thing to remember is, if you've got a damp patch, either wet or with water, or with either water or paint, your paint that you put on the top can't go any further than the water line. So that way you've got a certain amount of control. Even if you tip it, it's not going to go anywhere, apart from to the edge of the water. So if you wanted a nice dark area like that, you could tip it and let it dry. But anyway, that's something to bear in mind, so that when we're painting loosely, you can actually then keep a certain amount of control. I made myself a quick little sketch just to give myself an idea of what I want to do, and I'm hoping to create a nice focal area, so I'll put 2 flowers together there with another one just at the side, and hopefully I won't need to get too much more complicated than that before you kind of understand the technique. And I also tried some of my colours out. When I'm painting loosely, I very often do not use a pencil at all, but today I have given myself a very light pencil drawing, which I'll stick to an extent, but maybe not completely. So let's see how it goes. I think I'll start at the top of my page and work down. I've got a selection of brushes out. I've got a nice big brush out, which is a size 8 series 22 Kolinsky sable. I've also got a smaller one for stalks and twiddly bits and maybe even the buds, so you can keep a certain amount of control that way too. And that's a series 33, all Kolinsky sable. Then if I want to put some tendrils or stalks or tiddly bits, start fiddling a bit, I've got the sword brush out, which is a 1/4 inch. Right, and my big fat brush has actually got a very good point on it. So let's see, I've got quinacridone magenta here, I've got permanent rose and a little touch of cobalt blue. There's variation, quite a lot of variation in these Clematis buds, including some green. But I'm going to allow a lot of the detail to go. I'm going to allow, hopefully, my colours to blend one into another and create a nice loose painting today. Something you do need to do is try and enjoy it, because actually it's a lovely technique. It's by far my favourite, and also a technique that suits watercolour really, really well. I always think that piece of music sounds like the Downton Abbey music. So I'm actually going to stop that looking quite so stiff and boring by putting a little bit of water beside it and letting it float away and creating a little bit of a background there. And I'm going to try and stop myself from going back and changing things up too much until such time as it's a bit drier and I can see exactly what I've got. So try not to keep touching in the same area until it's drier. I'm creating this stalk that comes, that's the main stalk coming through there. And I will pick it up again in a bit. So another bud here. So I'm also going to try and create some variety so that everything doesn't look the same. Bring a bit of a deeper colour into this one. At the base here, they can get quite strong in that particular area. I've also got a nice green mixed up, which is a sap green with some Payne's grey. I'm not sure I'm going to get too involved with leaves, but I may use some of this green to indicate loose leaves and maybe even some areas of background with this colour. It's a nice soft green. So I'm not going to get too detailed with the leaf because I want that to sort of create some background shapes as well. Leaving white paper. If you wanted an area to bleed into the background and it's dried up, as that little area has, you can always just drop a little bit more on and let it go. And that's going to create a nice shape for me, hopefully. I'm holding my brush quite loosely, as we did when we used the pen, really, because that will stop me from getting too detailed or getting hard marks, and hopefully it will create nice loose areas for me. Not holding it tightly at all. That way you're allowing the brush, the paint and the water, I wish that wouldn't keep rattling, to actually create some of the marks for you, because you're not controlling it too precisely. Maybe I'll put that here. So I've already gone off piece and I've stopped following my drawing, but I've still got the overall shape to help me. Some of these leaves have lovely sort of pinky areas, so I can drop some of that into the background as well. So your background doesn't have to go everywhere, it just needs to help to bring out the flowers and to loosen up the shapes. So wet on wet, wet on dry, then dropping the water back on top. All of that can be used, all of those techniques that we've done can be used in this kind of painting. Just think about what you're doing all the time and what you think you could do to create nice shapes and nice marks and an overall good composition. Right, I'm up against a Clematis now, so that's not necessarily the star of the show. I think this one probably will be. So I've got my big brush out. See if I can get this colour fairly well. Yep. Right, so working in the direction that I see the markings on that flower, on that petal. Leaving white paper, also leaving a bit of a space for some of the little stamens that are going in there. Lifting off some light, letting some of it bleed away, ignoring the edge where the pencil line is. And while it's still damp there, I'm going to start putting some of these stamens in, because I would like them to mingle. I don't want them to be stiff. Painting in a very different way. Okay, so that petal's looking okay. There's part of a petal here before we come onto the main Clematis there in the centre. More showing this side as well. So the whole overall shape will start coming together fairly soon. The biggest tip I can give you, when we paint loosely, is not to judge till it's complete and dry. You're going to get completely different images when it's dry than you are when it's still this wet. So you've got to give it a chance to settle, to do its own thing a bit, without touching it before you reach that point. You really will start overworking and probably taking the lovely looseness away from your nice loose painting. So I'm sort of working as I go around, letting it grow as we go. Letting this brush do some of the work for me. And because I've got my 3 colours together in this little dish, I'm getting variety in colour as well, which is going to be more interesting than if I was using it all the, just one colour all the time. While it's wet, I know I said don't keep touching, but while it's still wet, you can actually just drop a little bit more in if you think it's drying up a little light. So we're not looking for reality particularly. We just want to create the impression of this clematis without worrying too much about reality and making it look too perfect and detailed. That's all for another day. So I'm using this leaf, the sort of leaf shapes a bit for the background, as well as just letting some of it go as a background. Just sort of indicating what might look similar to the plant when it's sitting outside. Actually, it would have been quite nice to sit outside and paint it. The weather is good enough, but I'm not sure about what the tech team would have thought about that. It might happen. I don't think I've done it yet, or have I? Maybe I sat in front of the hollyhocks last year, can't really remember. Right, so there's an opportunity to get quite dark in there, so I'm dropping a little bit more depth in. We always have to remember to put some darks in. Right, now I've got a nice bud here. And if I work that side where it's still wet, some of that's going to bleed away. Make a nice mark. Help it a little bit. Keep an eye on your subject, keep looking at it and getting nice ideas of what you can do next. If you haven't set up a perfect composition in front of you, which I haven't. And I really need to bring this colour back, this side of this bud. Otherwise it's going to look wrong and get a bit sort of patchwork like. I'm working around another bud there though. So I'm only touching where I want it to bleed and blend. I'm keeping that edge now nice and pale because I want the strength to be in the centre here. Right, now I'm going to be a bit more careful about painting this particular one. So there's no reason why I shouldn't paint it with my large brush because it's got a good point, but you may find it easier just to go to a smaller brush that's still got hopefully a good point, and this is just a 5, where you want to have just that little bit more detail and strength and a little bit more of everything really for your focal area. Trying at the same time to avoid monotony. Still painting in the same way, but just using a little bit smaller brush so it doesn't run away with me too much. So you may find that a little bit easier. I'll try not to take quite as long this week as I did last week with the building. I may stop in a minute and just quickly do some more. I don't want to take too much of your time away. Stop it. So always look for a nice strong focal point, and it's always helpful to put 2 flowers together if you've got a flower that hasn't that many petals. For instance, if you had a rose, you wouldn't need to think like that because a rose would make a wonderful, nice, strong, heavy focal point for you as it is. But something like this, that's got just the 4 petals, would benefit from having another one sitting beside it, filling that focal area. Right, 1 more petal on there. Painting loosely doesn't mean that you paint carelessly. You've still got to be careful, and you've got to think very, very carefully about what you're doing. Probably more so than if you're just copying exactly what's in front of you, because you've got to learn what's going to look right and what isn't going to look quite so good for another time. So don't worry about getting things a little bit wrong sometimes, or wrong maybe isn't quite the right word, but creating something that you're not quite so happy with is never such a bad idea, because that means you're going to learn from that and you'll remember much better than if I just say it. Right, so that's the little focal chap. Bring that little background colour through. So I'm now going to stop for a bit and just create another flower and another bud there before I continue. Alright, I've just created another bud and I've made a very subdued little flower here because I didn't want it to be too prominent and take away from this area here, which is now dry. Popped a bit of background around, but I want to keep background very pale down here because I've got a little collection of leaves here that I think should go in a bit more precisely, perhaps, to help tell the story a bit. So let's see. They have some very nice colours in these leaves, so I'm trying to pick that up a little bit. It'll keep them together with the colours in the flowers. Have to be a bit careful because that's still damp in that area there. Nice shapes, they sit very nicely. Let that one go a little bit. Pop some of that nice pinky colour on. Music's now going to go a bit crazy. Oh, wish I could find something else. Let's try this one. Pop a little bit of water by that one. I'm going to keep back, I'm not putting any background around that side, I'm going to keep background just here, this side of the subject. You don't always have to think that you've got to go around everything with your background everywhere. It sometimes looks nicer not to do that. Stalk comes through here though. The texture of the paper is always going to help you to get little broken lines and lights and darks, so don't be afraid to let that happen, and don't always try to fill that in. You're going to get a lighter end result if you just sometimes let these things be. Stopped following my pencil line again. So if you have created some nice soft pencil lines that you end up not going anywhere near and you want them to disappear, you can wait until everything's completely dry, then you can erase them carefully. I think we need another little leaf just here, not exactly where I placed it in the first instance. That's awful. It's not Clematis music, is it? Right. Well, I seem to be almost there. As far as I really wanted to be with this today, anyway. It's not dry, so I don't really want to go back and do very much at the moment. But there are things that could be done. So I'll just stop, have a bit of a think, come back when it's dry and see if there is anything else that I want to do to it or to show you today. Okay, so it's more or less dry. It hasn't completely straightened out yet, but it will. I haven't decided on doing anything very much to it. I've got the sword brush out, which is a good little brush for doing a bit of fiddling. I think that main stalk needs to show up quite well. So popping a little bit more here and there on that's going to give it nice strength through the centre of the page. It's little things now when you reach this point that you can just pop in, but as I've said, don't overdo it. A little bit more maybe in some of the centres, but not anything very much. If you use your mix quite wet, it's going to dry up nice and light and loosely, so don't get heavy with any of this sort of thing. But it needs a nice bit of depth, I think, in the centre here, which you do see on some of these little flowers. and that's really going to make that one stand out. So that was a wizard wheeze. I like that one. I think I'm going to just leave it. But what it has very often, not always, is some sort of curly, tendrily things, but you've got to be careful not to make it now look too contrived by putting too much of this kind of thing in, and don't ever draw anything like this first, because you can't follow your pencil line if you do. But something like that is perfectly acceptable because that's what I'm seeing. Sometimes they don't even curl that much, but kind of do things like this. So here's where you can add little touches of interest to your end, to the end result. They do have sort of veins and things, but I'm not going into that. But I like all this kind of thing, but like I say, don't overdo it. I think that's going to have to stop, otherwise it's going to get silly. Right, so that's my little rendition today. Stop, stop, stop. So I don't know if you'll have a clematis. You may, and if you do, it's a nice flower to paint. Keep it very, very simple, and maybe just paint one flower and a bud and a little bit of leaf if you've not painted it before. Get more complicated, fill the page if you're an experienced painter and you would like to do that. The other thing is you can sit outside and paint it in situ, which is a lovely thing to do. If you haven't got a clematis, try and find something else. Maybe just one flower would be nice. Just a profile of one flower would work, and paint it nice and loosely with a big brush. Allow the paint to go all over the place. And maybe add some splattering to your painting. I guess I could put some on here. What do I think? Let's do it. At least you'll see how to do it. So I'm using that sort of dark pink and my size 5 brush. And I'll try and keep, I think, in the focal area with it and around the stamens. It will dry up lighter. If you don't like it, now's the time to dab it and get rid of it if you don't like it all. Or the other thing you can do, if you want some of those little splatters to disperse and loosen up your whole composition, just splatter with some water on the top and then let it dry, and you'll find it will have made some really nice marks for you and left just a few splatters. Whatever's going to happen there is going to dry up quite well, and there. So, all good. Great, so try not to overwork. Try to leave any fixing up until the end when it's dry, and have a look and see if you like it. And if you do like it, leave it. If you don't, try to improve it, but don't overdo it. And don't forget that we learn from not getting things right all the time. And so next week I'm going to paint another flower, But this time, next week, I'm going to paint something without using any pencil at all. Okay? Now have a good week, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.